Welcome. So this is part 2 of the lesson in which we're talking about exact values, and we're now going to go through some questions. So the instructions are write down the exact values of the following. So first things first, sine of pi on 3. So these ones are very straightforward because we know the angle pi on 3 very well. It's something that we have memorized. So we can simply go, well, sine of pi on 3 is going to be equal to the square root of 3 on 2. Remember, you can use your special triangles to help you out when answering these questions. So you just give it a sketch. Because I'm dealing with pi on 3, I've got this one right here. So that's pi on 3 here. Remember, this is the square root of 3. This is 2. This is 1. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So it's going to be the square root of 3 over 2. That's how I got that answer right there. Let's move on to our next one. Again, I want you to recognize that this question is very easy because we're dealing with an angle that is in the first quadrant. So it's one that we've memorized. And we know that the answer to this is going to be 1 over the square root of 2. And remember, you can use your special triangle to help you answer these questions. So this is the different special triangle. So this is the one in which we're going to have pi on 4 here, 1, 1, the square root of 2. Because it's cos, it's going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. 1 over the square root of 2 is how we're getting that answer right there. And yet again, this one here, again, what I want you to recognize is that this one is easy because pi on 6 is in our first quadrant, and therefore it's one that we have memorized. Tan of pi on 6 is going to be 1 on the square root of 3, 1 on the square root of 3. And if you're struggling with that one, we're going to utilize this triangle right here. So let's just give it a resketch. You probably wouldn't keep resketching it, you'd probably just draw one and then just keep referring to it. But as we're trying to memorize these triangles, it's probably helpful that we do keep drawing it. This is going to be pi on 6 here. This is going to be 1, the square root of 3, 2. Tan is opposite over adjacent. So opposite, adjacent is here. So it's opposite to that angle, and then adjacent is going to be that, 1 on the square root of 3. That's how I'm getting it. What I want you to notice about these first 3 questions is that they're very easy because the angles are all in the first quadrant, and therefore it's stuff that we're very comfortable with. But then we come to things that are a bit trickier. And as you can see, these are not angles in our first quadrant, which make them a bit trickier. So how are we going to approach these? What we're going to do is we're going to break up these angles so that we get them into these forms right here. So here I have 5 pi on 6. So obviously I want to break this up. So one component is pi on 6 and then something is something else. And I'll be showing you how to do that. The best way to learn these things is by actually doing them. All right. So I have cos of 5 pi on 6. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into 6 pi on 6 minus pi on 6. Do you see how I have this pi on 6 component? That's very important. And it's also important that this right here is, because it's 6 pi on 6, it's just pi, because these 6's will cancel, and I'm just left with pi minus pi on 6. Now what we need to recognize is that this right here is what we've seen in previous lessons. This is pi minus an angle. And we know that pi minus theta corresponds to our second quadrant. And now we ask ourselves the question, is cos positive or negative in my second quadrant? Well, it's negative. It's going to be negative cos of the angle. That's what we've learned in our previous lesson. And now we're really like seeing it in action. We know that theta is going to be pi on 6. So instead of theta, let's just write pi on 6 in there. And now what we've got, we know that our answer is going to be negative because we've got this negative here. And now we have to figure out what cos pi on 6 is going to be. Hopefully you can just kind of immediately go, hey, that's going to be the square root of 3 on 2. But if you're struggling, remember, rely on those special triangles. I really struggle drawing these special triangles. Pi on 6 is not that one. It is the one up here, pi on 6. This is 1. This is the square root of 3. This is 2. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse. This one over that one. That's how I got it. I know it's negative because cos is negative in my second quadrant. That's how I'm getting my answer there. That's going to be my answer. Let's give it a highlight. Let's now move on to our next one. All right, so what we're going to do here is yet again break it up so it looks like something I'm familiar with. So we're going to go sine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go 8 pi on 4 minus pi on 4. Now that is sine of 8 pi on 4 is 2 pi minus pi on 4. And what I really want you to recognize here is that that is the same thing as this, 2 pi minus an angle. And we know that that corresponds to my fourth quadrant. So this is what we learned in our previous lesson about symmetry properties. Now we have to ask ourselves, is sine positive or negative in my fourth quadrant? Well, it's going to be negative, so my answer is going to be negative sine of the angle. The angle in this case is pi on 4, so I put pi on 4 in there. Sine, negative sine pi on 4, well, what's sine of pi on 4? I know my answer is going to be negative, so now the question is what is sine pi on 4? Again, what I really hope is that you're able to do after a while is just memorize that it's going to be that. But if you are struggling, you can just use your special triangle. I'm going to have to draw a triangle again. Okay. Why can't I draw? There we go. So this is going to be pi on 4. This is going to be 1 square root of 2. And there it's sine, so it's opposite. Hypotenuse, 1 on the square root of 2. Bang. Let's go into our next one here. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to break up this angle into something more manageable. We're going to break it down into 3 pi on 3 plus pi on 3. Because that is going to be the same as 4 pi on 3. And now what I'm going to do is say, well, that's the same thing as pi plus pi on 3. And we recognize that this is telling me, based on my symmetry properties, that this is going to be in my third quadrant. And if it's in my third quadrant, what we can then do is ask ourselves the question, is tan positive or negative in my third quadrant? Tan is actually positive in my third quadrant. So my answer is going to be tan of pi on 3. Tan of pi on 3 is going to be the square root of 3. And again, what I do hope is that you're able to do those really quickly after a while. But remember, you can always rely on your triangles if you're having trouble. Pi on 3 is this angle down here. This is the square root of 3. This is 2. That's 2. That's 1. Tan is opposite over adjacent. Square root of 3 over 1 is the square root of 3. All right, so those are our answers. So let's just stop here for a moment and just reflect on how we answered these. So what we did is we broke up these angles so that we ended up with pi or 2 pi or pi plus or whatever, and then pi on 6, pi on 4, pi on 3. We got it back into an angle from our first quadrant, and then we were able to use our symmetry properties from the previous lesson to figure out whether it was going to be positive or negative. That's what we did. Okay, let's keep on going. Let's answer these now. Now these are the same. The only difference is that they're degrees, not radians. Most of the time you're not dealing with degrees that much, but I just thought we'd go through them since in the textbook you are asked these, and it is fair game. We can ask you things in degrees, so it is good that you're comfortable with them. We're going to be using the same technique. So 150 degrees, let's break that up. That can be 180 minus 30 degrees. Remember, that's the same thing as sine pi minus 30, or sine pi, let's just do that, which is telling me it's going to be in the second quadrant. Is sine positive or negative in the second quadrant? Sine is positive in the second quadrant. So that means I'm going to end up with sine of the angle, and we know that the angle is going to be 30. So what is sine of 30? Sine of 30 is going to be a half. If you're struggling to get that, you can draw your special triangle. You can say that we're dealing with 30 degrees, which is not that one, it is this one. And this is going to be the square root of 3. This is going to be 1. This is going to be 2. Then sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so it's 1 over 2. That's how we're getting it. Also remember that 30 is pi on 6. All right. This one, I'm going to go cos is. Now, what can I break this into that will enable me to answer this question? After a while of thinking, you should say, well, I can break it up into 180 plus 60. That will work. 180 plus 60 is 240, so that checks out. And now what I can do is say, hey, this is the same thing as cos pi plus an angle, which tells me that this is going to be in my third quadrant. Is cos positive or negative in my third quadrant? It is negative in my third quadrant, so it's going to be negative cos of the angle, which is 60. Cos of 60 is the square root of 3 on 2. And then because I've got a negative, it's going to be negative the square root of 3 on 2. Ooh, wait, I just messed that up. Sorry. I always think that's pi on 6. It's not, it's pi on 3. That's going to be negative a half. Ooh, nearly messed it up. So it's negative because that's negative, and then just take your time with this one. So I know that 60 is going to be here. Square root of 3, 2, 1. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse. It's going to be 1 over 2. So, you know, it's always good to have those special triangles up your sleeve. And, you know, sometimes putting in degrees just really freaks you out. So remember, 60 degrees is pi on 3. So what you'll just notice is that people will make that mistake. They'll see the 6 and then in their head have pi on 6 in their head, but 60 degrees is pi on 3. So don't be like me, think. All right, last one, tan of 315. What can I break this down into? This could be tan of 360 minus 45. Yes, that will work. And that means I'm going to be left with tan of, now this would be 2 pi minus an angle, which tells me it's in the 4th quadrant. And then once I know it's in the 4th quadrant, what I'm going to do next is say, well, tan is negative in my 4th quadrant. So it's going to be tan of 45 degrees. And I know that 45 degrees, tan of 45 degrees is 1. And because it's negative, it's going to be negative 1. But now even I'm doubting myself. Let's draw a triangle here. This is going to be 45 degrees. This is 1, this is 1, this is the square root of 2. Tan is opposite over adjacent. 1 over 1 is 1. That's how we're getting it. All right, so just be careful as you're going through it. Don't make any silly mistakes. Let's just highlight what my answers were there. This is an answer. This is an answer. And this is an answer. Okay, hopefully all that makes sense. And just the idea of breaking them up and using your symmetry properties. I'll go through one more part, so I'll have a part 3 of this video, just so I'm breaking it up into small sections, and we'll go through some more advanced questions there as well. Okay, I'll see you in that lesson, part 3.